Wedding Planner.
The Wedding Planner is the perfect love story. In my opinion, it's one of the best rom-coms of all time and my personal favorite. It has all of the elements to make the perfect love story, especially by Hollywood standards. It also has Jennifer Lopez and Matthew McConaughey. Everything about this movie works. However, watching it back with adult eyes was very surprising. From a different angle and a different lens, not only is The Wedding Planner the perfect love story, but it can also be a horror movie. As a matter of fact, a horror movie in 6 parts. We've all been deluded under the spell of the strong jawline, that million-dollar smile, unmaskable Texas accent, and one of the sexiest noses in Hollywood, that is Matthew McConaughey. I'm going to have a moment of silence because Matthew McConaughey. But make no mistake about it, The Wedding Planner can very well be a horror story. Let's get into it. Thank you for clicking on my video, and if you're returning, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be recapping The Wedding Planner, one of my favorite movies ever and my favorite rom-com of all time, and I'm going to be sharing my thoughts through a 2025 lens. Now, the movie is the best rom-com, and again, it works so well. After all this time, there are only a few things about it that are cringe. However, it can also double as a horror film, and I'm excited to bring you the reasons why. Now, the movie is very funny, and it's also very endearing, but there are several things that happen that make you go, as an adult. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section below, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Let's get started. The movie opens up with Mary Fiore hard at work as the best wedding planner I've ever seen. Far better than mine, but we won't get into that. She's in a million places at once, always proactive, fully prepared, managing to toe the line of being fully present, super attentive, eager as a terrier, yet still calm and reassuring to her bride. After yet another successful wedding pulled off by Mary Fiore, the best wedding planner around, we then see her life outside of work. We see Mary eating dinner alone on a TV tray in her living room, and it feels like the film wants us to believe that she's lonely. Now, one thing I will say, back in the day, that's actually how I saw this scene, but looking back on it in 2025, I see something completely different. Mary isn't alone, she's just living alone. She's gainfully employed in her dream job. She works with a variety of wealthy clients, making career-changing connections to add to her already stacked network. She's friends with her colleagues and her boss. She's killing it at work to the point of being considered for a full partnership. And her condo is one of the most beautifully curated spaces I've ever seen in a film. Mary isn't lonely. She's at peace. She's also financially sound, beautiful, her fashion is on point. She has friends, events several times a week, great relationship with her father, a member of the Bay Area Scrabble Club. This woman is actually living the high life. She's just not married. But that's the thing. Hollywood tells women we need to be married in order to be worthy of the breath in our lungs. Because of that, she's painted as a spinster. So Mary's dad fully bought into this message and decides to pawn her off on a childhood friend named Matsumo. He betroths her to be married without her consent or even her knowledge.
This is the most wonderful day of my life. A man of my very own.
Matsumo shows up unexpectedly, and Mary rightfully storms out of Scrabble practice in humiliation. Following week, Mary is on the heels of a hot new lead that could cement her place as partner of her wedding planning firm. And while distracted, she steps into a manhole in the middle of the street and almost gets run over by a runaway dumpster. And wouldn't you know it, the brawny Texas-born and bred white knight himself, Matthew McConaughey, well, Dr. Steve, rushes to her rescue. He happens to be a pediatrician and takes her to his practice where he nurses her back to health with the help of some of the loudest children I have ever seen. Her friend Penny picks her up from this impromptu date of playing doctor with the hot stranger she met in the gutter, and while there, she sets Mary up on a friendly outing with Dr. Steve to a movie in the park. He accepts, and while there, Penny makes up the worst excuse ever to leave. Like the literal worst excuse of all time.
Oh no.
This date is interesting. Mary and Steve sit near a guarded tree that's reserved for her by one of her Scrabble mates, and they watch the movie while exchanging witty banter and eating M&Ms. only the brown ones. The movie cuts to a moment of beautiful music, and other watchers begin to dance. So Mary asks Steve to dance, and he declines. That is so embarrassing. However, at the persistent behest of the security guards standing watch, aka Mary's Scrabblemate, Steve reluctantly accepts and they dance. Would you even want to dance with someone who said no at first? Again, they exchange witty banter about why he dances so well, and Mary yet again invites him to something else he seems uninterested in, to attend her Scrabble match. By the way, he never accepted, nor did he answer her. It never comes up again. He deflects by negging her about stepping on his foot. They start to fall into the moment of romance, and as they dance, they begin to draw closer for a kiss. Only for a well-timed omen from God in the form of a raindrop, telling Mary to get the heck out of Dodge because this man is trash, interrupts them, and they fall out of the trance, and they run away to avoid getting drenched. Now, the movie wants us to see this big moment as romantic, and sure, by 90s and early 2000s standards, it is. But this is actually where the horror story starts. Follow me. Mary wakes up in a hospital on a weekday when she was previously heading to work, and all she remembers is getting her foot stuck in the middle of a manhole, ruining her Gucci shoe. Horror story part 1. She is now surrounded by screaming children who are pushing monitor buttons and pulling wires she's still connected to in a hospital bed, with no knowledge of who anyone is or how she got there. Horror story part 2. Later, she finds out Dr. Steve rifled through her personal belongings and called her friend Penny. While well-meaning, this man scooped up a woman who was passed out in the street, took her to his hospital without her or anyone else's consent, and is now medically treating her. He also went through her things. He didn't take her to a hospital where other doctors treated her. He then treated a woman he found in the street.
Why are you still on top of me?
That's a good question.
While all of this was well-meaning, the right thing to do would have been to treat her from a safe space at the site of the accident while waiting for an ambulance. Because taking an unconscious woman away from the site of an accident after previously laying on top of her for an inordinate amount of time, so much so that she protested, and then carry her away without anyone being the wiser is in poor taste to say the least. Horror story part 3. And how do we know he didn't push the damn trash can? At this point, they don't know a taxi was at fault. This could have ended horribly for Mary. She's lucky this was a well-meaning doctor, because he could have been some rando with meat cleavers lined up in his basement and a variety of leather masks ready to do his worst when he got her to a second location. Never go to a second location. If that wasn't bad enough, they go on a date at the urging of Mary's friend, not Mary. Mary is forced into this situation by her friend with a polite but fairly disinterested man who nags her the whole time to manipulate her into vying for his attention. He tells her she has a big neck. He then tells her she stepped on his foot. It's awkward. Negging, the narcissistic flirtation of choice. Horror story part 4. She invites him to dance. He says no, and then he's forced to by the security guard keeping watch. She invites him to her Scrabble match, and he ignores her completely. And then when he's making his move on her, it rains. If there were any more signs that this would be a match made in hell, Mary would have simply burst into flames. And she still probably would have asked if she could use her burning limbs to keep his ass warm. She does not read the signs. Mary meets up with her new client, Fran, at one of her other weddings. Fran is observing in the run-up to her own big day and Mary's big moment of potentially making partner at her firm. And she prods Mary about her glow. Mary tells her about the guy she met, not mentioning his name, however. Fran encourages her to go for it, and Mary is clearly feeling caught up in the rapture of the Texas twister that is Dr. Steve, aka Maddie McConaughey, and she is all in, as am I. Oh, sorry, got distracted. Let's continue. We then see Mary attending a dance class, and she's surprised by Fran, who's there with her fiance, the groom Mary has yet to meet. And who is it? Well, the movie is over 20 years old. You know dang well it's Dr. Steve. Mary is stunned. I mean, frozen expression, jaw on the floor, eyes wide, heart shattered, touch me and I'll fall to pieces, shocked. Steve is also a bit perplexed, but as most cheaters do, he slyly plays it off in front of his extremely aloof fiancée. Fran then gets a call and forces Steve and Mary to dance together, as if they couldn't just step out with her until her call was complete, but rom-coms. Steve and Mary dance. He deflects all of Mary's very valid points and continues to gaslight her into thinking all of the romance was in her head, completely one-sided, and none of his actions as a soon-to-be married man were inappropriate. Mary, however, is not taking this lying down. Go her. She confronts him while demolishing him on the dance floor, but he manages to keep up, both dance-wise and in verbal combat. She finally pulls a coup de grace.
And why'd you almost kiss me?
He's stunned. He can't answer. He can't speak. And as he's staring deep into her eyes, reminiscent of a few days prior when he stared at her from above as he non-consensually laid on top of her for hours and hours, he doesn't answer. Just then, Fran, who's managed to miss the dance routine of the century, the one with the raucous and fawning audience mid-applause, walks in and busts up the whole thing with more wedding planning. Fran is the most aloof person I've ever seen. Mary then considers quitting the wedding, and Penny reminds her it's career suicide. Steve, aka Eddie as Fran calls him, confides in a golf buddy who blames cold feet for the lapse in judgment, and Steve shakes off his feelings of desire for Mary. Or did he? The following weekend, Fran, going full toxic girl boss mode, forces Steve and Mary to accompany her and her parents for a weekend in the country to view a wedding venue. For a whole weekend. While it seems nice in theory, I hope they paid Mary her weight in gold for all of this nonsense. Mind you, Mary is still a wedding planner, not just Fran's planner. What if she had a wedding that weekend? Anyway, during this weekend away, Matsumo storms the palace and forces Mary to introduce him to her clients. He bombarded her place of work and forcefully announces their engagement to people that he does not know, nor has he ever met. Mind you, and I failed to mention this earlier, he's already shown up at her office days prior without consent, and she had to sneak out with Penny's help. He doesn't know Mary, and all he knows for sure is that she isn't even remotely interested. He doesn't even know if she's dating or not. Steve could have been her man. He wouldn't know because all he cared about was his announcement. Horror Story Part 5. And if that wasn't bad enough, the weekend afforded Mary and Steve a moment to clear the air after their dance revolution fiasco the week prior, where they verbally eviscerated each other while neither decided to do the right thing and tell Fran. Also during this weekend, Mama was a whole Looney Tune. To cement its place as the most ill-fated and awkward trip a wedding planner has ever taken, Fran asks Mary about the man she was falling for and begins describing her date with Steve as Steve is in front of them driving. This moment is when I knew Fran knew Steve was the guy and was simply choosing her nuptials and happily ever after over fidelity. Because if she didn't know, she's officially dumb as rocks. Mary tells the truth. She told Fran that the man ended up being one of the grooms of the weddings that she was planning. Fran is disgusted, even comparing her own beloved and saying that she's happy to have a man like him with all those creeps running around. Fran, baby, the call is coming from inside the Land Rover.
Yeah, Fran, you're really lucky.
Just as Fran and Mary are getting into this convo, Steve swerves the car to distract them. This man was willing to risk a vehicular rollover on a 2-lane highway, likely killing everyone, including himself, just so he didn't have to admit he was a cheater. So not only did Mary lose her man, he also tried to kill her. And if he had succeeded, the news still would have put up a photo of him jet skiing instead of a real photo of him trying to kill his wife and wedding planner. Horror Story Part 6.
What happened? Didn't work out.
I saw you 3 days later, and you still had stars in your eyes.
He turned out to be the groom of one of the weddings I was planning.
No.
Yes.
That is the most disgusting thing I have ever heard.
Later in conversation with her well-meaning but severely overstepping father, she finds out her parents' marriage was actually arranged. And as her father described falling in love with her mother, she grew to respect their union, but also reconsider her aversion to being set up with Matsumo. This was a moment where she understood her father's actions and motivations for the first time. A few days later, when she stops by her dad's house and he's not home, she runs into Matsumo, who apologizes for crashing her work weekend, and they sit down for a nice dinner. He recites memories of her late mother, and she allows herself to get a little bit closer to him. Fran goes out of town for work and leaves Steve alone to do the planning. Now, I've given this movie a lot of grace for some of the unbelievable things that have taken place because I love rom-coms and I love movie magic. But here is where I draw the line. I've been a bride. I've known several brides over the years. And when a bride is planning a wedding, I cannot imagine her, even if she's going out of town for a short while, leaving the entire wedding in the hands of the groom, especially a high society wedding. Sure, they can do it together. But this groom in particular is very disinterested, to the point that he just met their wedding planner a week ago and they've been planning for weeks. This is unrealistic, but we're going to continue. Of course, emails, pictures, and simply rescheduling is not a thing in Fran's world, despite this being the early 2000s, but rom-com. While out planning and doing wedding tasks, Steve and Mary become friendly and leave the old conflict in the past. It's then that the rom-com gods throw Mary another grenade in the form of her former fiancé and his expectant wife showing up at the flower shop where she and Steve are shopping. They introduce themselves to Steve, and upon asking how they know one another, Mary tells the story of finding her fiancé in her car loving up on his ex, who's now his expectant wife, the night before their wedding.
He was my fiance. And on the night of our rehearsal dinner, I found them making out. In my car. Did I leave anything out?
Mary gets drunk, and for the second time in this movie, Steve takes a barely conscious Mary to a second location alone where she is defenseless. She's so drunk, she has no idea how she even got into her apartment building. And after a resident holds the door open, Steve carries Mary's limp body into her apartment. No one is alarmed at this. Horror Story Part 6. Thankfully, he's well-meaning, but again, the optics of this screams date grape, if you catch my drift. We know it's not indecent because we're the audience, but in their world, no one would have known that, and it screams creep. Steve, again, nurses Mary back to health, and as she sobers up, she confides in him about her pain of being betrayed. It's then that he finally confesses his feelings for her. She clearly wants to invite him back in, but she sets him straight, declines his advances, and establishes a firm professional boundary. Mary and Fran plan the rest of the wedding. Mary agrees to marry Matsumo, and she fully intends to move on with her life and put this whole thing aside once she makes partner at her wedding planning firm. The day of the wedding, Mary gets things going and then leaves Penny in charge to follow through, but all the planning is finished. Mary goes to the courthouse to marry Matsumo. But after her father realizes he's forcing his daughter to do something against her best interest, he pleads with her not to follow through. So Mary chooses to leave. Across town, back at the ranch, Steve, not knowing Mary is gone or even getting married, manipulates Fran into calling off the wedding by making her think it's her idea. As soon as he throws her into a taxi, despite likely having friends and family and even a limo waiting to take her away, he goes to find Mary. Coincidentally, he hops in the same taxi that caused him and Mary to meet up a few months earlier. He gets to the courthouse, and Mary's family tells him that she's not there. So he goes to the site of their first date, and what do you know? She's right there crying. Steve makes up with Mary, and now they are together in deceptive bliss eating brown M&Ms because Dr. Steve inaccurately assumes they have less food coloring. The end. When cutie patootie Dr. Steve told Mary that her theories on love were the rantings of a bitter and cynical woman, not only did I laugh because he was kind of right, but the bitter and cynical woman in the theory here is me. I'm not bitter, but I'm damn sure cynical, and I'm going to tell you why. Fran was the most oblivious character in a movie I have ever seen. It was almost sitcom oblivious because everything was unfolding right in front of her. And yes, she was a busy woman, but damn girl, the fact that these two met for the first time and froze and stared at each other as if they'd seen each other naked should have been a red flag to Fran. But no, Fran was literally wrapped up in her conversation, and her poor cell service definitely didn't have AT&T or Verizon. She was trying to figure it out. And while I do understand that she was wrapped up and she probably trusts her husband to be, so she probably wouldn't have thought anything, just from the mere fact that you don't know Mary, you should have been paying attention to their interaction. The fact that they didn't simply say, "Hi, how are you? It's nice to meet you," and sound polite should have been a red flag. Not only that, but if you don't know Mary or anything about Mary and you just said, she's just weird, you do know your husband to be. We all know our partners. And when something shifts in their tone or their mood or even their facial expression, we're going to notice it. And as if that wasn't bad enough, they danced together and they had some pure sexual chemistry with that dance. Not to mention, when Fran walked back in and the whole room was clapping for her husband to be and her wedding planner, and they were staring in each other's eyes, holding each other, even for a dance routine. But these two just met, right? Why are they talking so much when they're dancing with such hostility? Again, if I saw my husband or husband to be exchanging that kind of energy with a woman, I'm going to pick up on it. I don't care if the woman is spicy or my husband is snarky. I don't care if my husband is talking, even if I can't hear them, and he's talking with all this energy. Not only that, the fact that they had such good chemistry the first time they met, and he's holding her like that, again, for a dance routine. But still, the first time you meet someone, or if you're not comfortable with someone, you are still going to, I don't know, it was just a little bit more fun to see it displayed like that, as opposed to, "I want to get you in the sack." These two had insane sexual chemistry, and it was definitely on level 10 when they were dancing. Not only that, but the anger only played into that chemistry. And as his wife to be, I absolutely would have picked up on that. Fran is the most oblivious person I have ever seen. She didn't bat an eye. Not only that, but just because you're planning your wedding doesn't mean every moment of Mary's time is yours to claim. She pulled Mary out of a dance class that she didn't take Mary to. They happened to bump into each other in that dance class, and Fran was like, "We need a powwow," and pulled Mary out of the class. Ma'am, you could have sent an email. Fran, you saw Mary after her encounter with this mystery man, knowing you had been out of town that same night. When she tells you about the groom being the date, nothing in you thought to cross-reference your calendar with her story, knowing that this man turned out to be one of the grooms of the wedding you were planning. That didn't trigger you to say, "I trust my husband, but let me see, because I also was out of town that night, so that would be a funny coincidence, huh?" But no, Fran didn't bat an eye. Not to mention, as Mary is telling this story, your groom swerves the car. He almost had a head-on collision with another car. That didn't trigger you to say, "Why did he react like that?" to this story of one of the grooms being the guy that she went on a date with the night I was out of town. Fran, girl, I'm almost at the point where I'm like, cheat on her then. I don't... Fran! In that same car ride, Fran picks her wedding song. Your wedding planner, who should be a participant in all of this, scoffs at your choice in wedding song. So much so that you say, "What? Is it a bad song?" And she goes, "No, Fran, it's absolutely perfect," in a very smug tone. Ma'am, you guys just talked about, or right after this, you talk about her mystery date turning out to be one of the grooms of one of the weddings that she is planning, and nothing in you went back to that scoff. Nothing in you went back to the energy they displayed when they were dancing together. Nothing took you back to that first time they met and stared at each other like something was wrong. Fran! Oh my God. I refuse to believe Fran didn't have a lobotomy at the start of this movie, because, ma'am, what are you talking about? What are you doing? Where's your head at? How are you a businesswoman? You don't pick up on shit. The fact that he swerved the car is crazy. If nothing else triggered me, that would have triggered me. Because what are the odds? My wedding planner tells me that she went on a date with one of the grooms of the weddings that she was planning, and my groom swerves the car. And I know that the night she went on this date, I was out of town. Nothing would trigger you. Fran. Anyway, they should have given Fran more of a reason to not notice, more of an out, because when you watch the movie as an adult, I can't really focus on anything else other than, what the hell is wrong with Fran? Is she crazy? How did you not notice? Now, fast forward to the actual wedding day. When your groom calls off the wedding, in such a manipulative way, by the way, and your planner goes missing, who has been there on your heels all day long. Now she's disappeared, and suddenly your groom is calling off the wedding. You don't question it. As a matter of fact, when you guys decided to call off the wedding, why wouldn't you think, let's tell Mary? She'll handle this for us. Now, she has relied on Mary from things as small as don't let my mom sing at my wedding to help me pick out the venue and the dress and the music, etc. She has relied on Mary for every little thing, so much so that she's even attended other weddings that Mary has thrown so that she can see her work and participate. But you didn't think this, of all the moments, is the moment to call Mary? That didn't trigger you? And when you did, you would have noticed that Mary wasn't there. Mary is not there at the biggest wedding of her career. She's been there every step of the way, but suddenly Mary is not here, and my husband is calling off the wedding. Fran. Maybe I'm bitter and cynical because the day they met, I would have been like, no, what's going on here? The hell is this? Why y'all looking at each other like that? Let's get it out in the open. Because the only person in the wrong up until that point was Steve. Steve was the person in the wrong. And as the wedding planner, I know that this was pertaining to her career. I likely would have said, oh, I met you the other day when, you saved me from that trash can. I would have just put it out there. I don't like secrets because, first of all, my face can't lie. So I may as well just tell the truth. I learned that as a child. Maybe these are my rantings, but please let me know in the comment section. Would you have noticed these things? Am I giving Fran too hard of a time? Because I can't imagine these things happening with my husband and not picking up on this. So if I introduce my husband or husband to be to my wedding planner and they look at each other like this, and then my wedding planner later tells me one of the grooms of one of the weddings I was planning is actually the guy that took me on the date, but he didn't tell me, I would have gone back to that look. That car ride would have ended right there. Not only that, had I not noticed, him swerving the car certainly would have shook me into place. Anyway, what do y'all think? Let me know in the comment section below. Matsimo would have eventually gotten stabbed by me. I'm not gonna lie, I would have dealt with Matsimo at some point. Not that he wasn't adorable and endearing and super, super sweet, but a lot of killers are super, super charismatic and sweet and charming and all those things. But you show up to my job, you show up to my off-site work engagement, you show up to my Scrabble practice, you show up to my dad's house when I'm there alone and my dad is not there. At some point, I'm going to chin check the hell out of Matsimo, and that's if I don't stab him. Maybe not right in the chest or anything like that, but I'm damn sure stabbing him in the arm and the leg or something so that he knows I'm not playing. Because showing up somewhere unannounced and uninvited will certainly get you dealt with after a while. Yeah, he would have had to see me in another capacity because the only thing Matsimo knew about Mary was that she wasn't interested. He knew her mom had a small issue with her pinky finger, no nail on her little finger because the brick from the kitchen fell on it. He knew a little thing here or there about Mary, but I wouldn't even trust that considering the dad was rooting for him so much. He probably fed him information to get Mary to endear to him. You just don't know. But what I do know is by the time he showed up and saw me for the third time with no warning, I would have had to send Matsimo home with a message from me. I would have said, hey, take this back to my daddy and let him know he's getting your ass beat because what I'm not going to do is keep tolerating you showing up where you're not supposed to be. Again, I know it's a rom-com, so it's sweet and it's fine. But take it out of rom-com land. Her dad don't know anything about Matsimo either. The only thing he knows about Matsimo is that he was a good kid and he probably knows Matsimo's family, but he doesn't know Matsimo, the adult man. Not only that, but Matsimo seemed a little bit younger than Mary as well. So I probably would have vetted him a little while longer before I gave him my daughter in her daughter's hand in marriage. And to be fair, that's not his place to give anyway, but that's beside the point. I definitely would have vetted him for a lot longer and I would have allowed my daughter to vet him. Now, at the end of the movie, we saw that her father's growth journey did bring him to that conclusion that it's up to Mary to make her own decisions and that he should not guilt her or force her to do anything that she doesn't want to do. And so we did see her dad turn the corner on that. But he probably would have turned that corner a lot sooner with me when he was visiting Matsimo's ass in the hospital and then eventually jail. I don't know. I love Matsimo and I thought he was adorable, but I would have dealt with Matsimo. And when I was younger, I thought it was so cute. I was like, oh my God, he showed up with that ugly bird's nest and he's so cute. He's so funny, blah, blah, blah. The adult me was like, yeah, okay, Mary, either deal with this or this man's gonna have your face in a jar. You're gonna turn your ass into a lamp, girl. No, let me give him a little grace. Him showing up to her job was cute when he was sitting in the lobby and he was just reading his little magazine. Now, I probably would have caved. I would have been like, okay, we can go get a coffee or something. It's fine. Like, we all gotta eat, right? Like, I likely would have caved there. But when he showed up to Scrabble practice, that would have got on my nerves. And then when he showed up to my off-site work engagement, Massimo was begging for somebody to chin check him. He was cruising for a bruising. And that's why this can only occur in rom-com land, because Massimo alone could have been a horror movie. When she said it's the blind date that wouldn't end, yes, that's exactly what it was. And I would love for someone to repurpose this movie under that title and make it a whole new horror film, because this could have played as several different horror films. Now let's get into Dr. Steve, the ultimate villain in this movie. Now let's talk about Dr. Steve, aka the most beautiful version of Leatherface I've ever seen. Because Dr. Steve worked my nerves. Now, again, this is not Matthew McConaughey, because Matthew McConaughey could have done all these things and more, and I wouldn't bat an eye. So we're not going to talk about Matthew McConaughey. We're talking about Dr. Steve. Now, Dr. Steve did a number of things that brought me grave concern. When he first knocked her out of the way of the dumpster, he just happened to be at the right place at the right time, which is great. But when he knocked her out of the way of the dumpster, he laid on top of her for an inordinate amount of time. So much so that she mentioned it twice. Most people's reaction when they're helping someone, especially a stranger, is to give minimal contact but still be supportive. But most people would have caught her and then immediately gotten onto like a knee or sat off of her and like lifted her up, or just took care of her if they didn't want to move her at all because they didn't know if she had a neck or back injury. But he laid on her. And then the first time she mentioned it, that should have been like, oh crap. But I'm expecting a doctor to be a lot more sound and conscious during a crisis. But no, he was so wrapped up in her that he was laying on top of this woman in the street, and she had to mention it twice. He then picks up her unconscious body and transport her to his workplace. Now, he just happened to be a doctor. But can you hear how crazy that sounds? He didn't take her to just a random hospital or a general hospital. He took her to his office. Now, here's the thing. It probably was nearby because he was getting ready to go to work. It was the closest medical facility. I get that. But I likely would have called an ambulance and had her transported to a hospital. And if I was concerned about her, I would have just simply gone with her. I would have followed the ambulance or rode with her in the ambulance, but I would have gone with her around other third-party medical professionals so that the one who saved her and laid on top of her is not now just carrying her lifeless body and putting it in my Range Rover and hitting the streets. Now imagine you are somewhere like a coffee shop or the newsstand or whatever. You're getting ready to go to work and you happen to see a runaway dumpster, and you happen to see J-Lo and her nice Gucci shoes get stuck in a manhole, and you're like, oh shit, I'm about to watch a splat. They tried to turn J-Lo into Flat Stanley. And then you see Matthew McConaughey come and just whisk her out of the way, which, girl, if you was willing to die over that Gucci shoe, I don't know that the world would have missed you too much, because that's stupid as hell. Anyway, he saves her life. But then he lays on top of her. And then if that woman woke up and then passed back out, probably because one of her lungs had been trampled on and she passed back out, this man picks her up and takes her to his car, puts her in the car and drives her away. At the time, you don't know this man is a doctor. If I saw that and chose not to get involved, which is unlikely, if I saw that, I'm still writing down the plate number and then calling a unit. Like, hey, this guy just pushed this woman in the street, laid on top of her. When she passed out, he put her in his car and left. That was a kidnapping. Mary wakes up in a hospital. She don't know where she is. And she's around all these screaming, yelling children. But she finds out that this doctor, the same man who found her in the street, or who pushed her down in the street to save her life, but then picked up her lifeless body and took her with him. She has no memory of this. But then she finds out he went through her things. And while on the surface it sounds like, yeah, he had to get her insurance information. Honey, she could have given you that when she woke up. Were you not going to render aid if her insurance didn't cover it? He is an American doctor, so probably. But you would have still treated her, and you could have waited until she woke up to give you that. Or since you called her next of kin, you could have allowed her next of kin to go through her things and give you that information. Also, her next of kin could have simply called her father, who would have come in and given you all that information. The fact of the matter is, the doctor who treated you should not be going through your purse. Even though he did find Penny's number on the back of her Palm Pilot, so maybe he didn't go through all her things, but he went through them long enough to notice that she alphabetized her credit cards. So what the hell were you doing looking at her credit cards? Not only looking at them, but you looked at them long enough to notice that they were in alphabetical order. Was Dr. Steve stealing? What's going on with Dr. Steve? Because that's crazy. Not only that, I probably would have had one of my nurses do all of that. I would have had my nurse call her next of kin. I would have had my nurse look through her things if I had them look through them at all, which I wouldn't have. But I would have had my nurse look through her things in order to get that information for me, simply because I was the doctor who found her, who transported her, and is now treating her. This is a lot of one-on-one contact with a stranger, and it's probably going to be overwhelming because this is a woman and I am a man. But to be fair, gender aside, that's a lot of contact to have with someone without any consent whatsoever. Now to the less serious stuff, but stuff that I absolutely would have picked up on if I were married, and me and Dr. Steve would have had one time to have that little date, and I would have left early or went and sat on the other side of the park. Because when they went on their date, he nagged her the whole time. He actually started at the hospital when he told her she had a big neck. But then he nagged her the whole time. He teased her about her neck being big. And then later when they were dancing, he teased her about stepping on his foot. And this is supposed to be cutesy, but the way I'm set up, I would have been like, okay, child. Now, shit, do you like me or not? She initially invited him to dance. He said no. That would have been the end of it. I don't care if Scrabblemate told him to dance after all or not. I would have been like, no, he good. No, he don't want to dance. The gentleman don't want to dance, so we're not going to dance. Like, I would not dance with Dr. Steve because I don't want to be a charity case. Clearly, you're fine with having treasures from home on your desk, so your fiance should have been front and center. But anyway, you should have had a nice 8x10 of Miss Fran. But that was the moment to say, actually, I'm engaged. But did Dr. Steve do that? No. And didn't say boo about having a fiance. But what I'm not going to do is sit with this handsome fellow in my office who I carried here unconscious. In this theory, I'm clearly very strong. Carried this man unconscious. And then I'm going to be like, oh yeah, this is my brother. Who? Fiance? Nuh-uh. You want to go to the movie? He had so many opportunities. His intention was to have a little fun before he got married because his wife was out of town. He was off work and he did not mention her, although he had several opportunities to do so.
You want a confession in blood? At the movie, I was attracted to you. I was. You caught me. I admit it. I was a little unsure about the whole marriage thing. I was just being a guy and an opportunity presented itself. I never thought I'd see you again.
So you just told us exactly what you plan to do. If Mary had let that go any further, you absolutely would have followed suit. Eddie is a jerk. He was not the prize. If anything, I would have loved for Fran to put 2 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 together and say, you are attracted at the very least to our wedding planner. I think you were the groom who she went on the date with. Steve was not the prize. Steve had cold feet. And at the very least, let's say Steve didn't do anything wrong, which that would be a stretch. But let's say Steve didn't do anything wrong. You were just dating this woman since college. You've been dating her long enough to the point in which you've both graduated and you're treating patients and she's killing it in business. You guys have been together for a long time. At the very least, you're in your late 20s and you're already on another date the night you call off your wedding. Steve needs some time. Like, even if you think he didn't do anything wrong, he still needed to take a beat and be alone for a while. Steve is a serial monogamist. Steve is weird. That's why he's out here cheating, because he doesn't know himself. He's out here trying to find himself in every woman he dates. Anyway, they try to paint him as this noble creature because he's a pediatrician, but this movie paints him as a pediatrician so that we can have a soft heart with Dr. Steve. Dr. Steve was a serial cheater, and I guarantee Mary wasn't the first one he stepped out with. How often did Steve say, I got the night off, I want to have a little fun? And to be honest, I never thought I'd see you again. Is Mary one of the many? Because he certainly seemed comfortable doing that. I don't care what anybody says. If you have not cheated before, the first time you get into a space where that's even an option, you're going to show some form of discomfort. You're going to be put off by it. Dr. Steve was right at home. He couldn't care less. Had he simply said, yeah, I got caught up in the moment. I was attracted to you and I apologize for pulling you into something. I shouldn't have done that. And that would have been that. Instead, he goes on the offense and attacks her. He's the only one wrong in that scenario. Mary didn't know he was engaged. Fran didn't know he was out gallivanting. He was the only one with 360 knowledge of the whole situation, and he chose to omit the truth for a reason. He wanted to sleep with Mary. Whoever wrote his character should have really thought some of these things through, because here's why. When they're out and about and Mary runs into her ex and the woman he cheated on her with, and they're now married and expecting a baby, that would be hard for anybody. Even if you don't still feel for them, it would still be like, damn, that was awkward. When Mary ran into them, she was clearly in distress. Neither of them were drinking. But then the next scene, it's no longer daytime. It is now nighttime. And Mary is plastered and still holding an open container. Steve is not drunk and he doesn't even look like he's been drinking at all. So you mean to tell me he's been with her all day as she's clearly getting hammered? And at no point as a doctor did he say, hey, let me get you to someone or somewhere safe. No, he sat with her until she drank for so long that she actually got drunk. And then he decided to take her home. This is now the second time where Dr. Steve has taken an unconscious Mary to a second location. Now, because we're in rom-com land, it's all innocent. But think about that. I find it interesting that not only were they together long enough for her to get drunk, but he actively chose not to drink, which I'm glad he did because he was the designated driver. But you didn't think to drive her home way earlier before she got to this point? You waited until she was at this point to take her home? Okay. She was so drunk, she didn't even know how to get into her building. And he picks her up and carries her into her apartment. Again, this is the second time he takes Mary's unconscious body somewhere. In 2025, that looks crazy as hell. Again, we're in a rom-com, so it's fine. But just looking at that from another lens, it's like, again, he knows Penny. He's called her before. At no point did he think when she started drinking to call Penny. At no point did he think when he took her home to call Penny so that she could be there with someone. He's already met Massimo. He didn't think to call Massimo. Somebody, her dad, somebody, the Scrabble mate. You know where the Scrabble mate man worked. He could have gone to the park and said, hey, Scrabble mate man, Mary's drunk. Like something could have shaken, but Dr. Steve chose to wait until she was to the point in which she didn't even know where she was or what she was doing. And then he decided to take her home. But then after all of that, then he confides in her that he's in love with her. So Dr. Steve, if he weren't played by Matthew McConaughey, I would absolutely hate his guts. But he cute. He is that. Now that I've read everybody down, I want to share some thoughts on the movie itself. First of all, there is something so endearing about the fact that the movie allowed the main characters to kiss for the first time at the end of the movie. I love that that's actually what we end the movie on, is them kissing for the first time, because we see their love story started with their kiss getting interrupted. It's clear that there was almost a bit of longing there. And I love that this movie, a lot of rom-coms at the time, knew the art and the power of subtlety. But I love that this movie really utilized the subtlety for impact, because it left the audience waiting for that moment for them to finally act on their chemistry. I also love that the movie made the conscious decision to show their sexual and romantic chemistry in other ways, i.e. the horseback riding scene when she is straddling him. First of all, he saves her life. There is nothing like a knight in shining armor. I love a good save my life story now. That's always going to get me. That's why this movie just speaks to me. But not only did he save her life, but then she rode back straddling him. So he's on a horse and she's being a cowgirl, if you catch my drift, and they rode back like that. And of course, I already talked about it. Their dance scene had a lot of chemistry. I mean, all the touching, the rubbing, the dipping, the face to face. It was another form of storytelling, definitely showing their tension, but also their attraction, the push, the pull, the push, the pull. Displaying that in a physical sense through dance was a genius move. And it also helped us see that Matthew McConaughey can dance his ass off. We all knew that about J-Lo already. So it was nice to see Matthew McConaughey cutting a rug. So we didn't have to see them make out. We didn't have to see them kiss. We didn't have to see them do anything indecent. We saw them express the unsaid and the unspoken through dance, something that's pretty intimate. Another scene that showed their chemistry was when they were looking at the statues, when they accidentally castrated the statue and it gets stuck to his hand. And so when she's gently holding his hand in hers and removing the statue, and she's just working diligently and dutifully, just silently, that silence is loud, because up until this point in the movie, they've had an argument, but they've also almost kissed. They've had that very intense dance scene. There are a lot of things in the movie that have shown this push and pull dynamic. And at this moment, they're choosing to keep planning the wedding that's kind of in the way. It's the wedding itself is the elephant in the room, because the two of them want to be together. And before they realize they want to be together, they're still just interested in finding out more about each other. So there's so much happening in this scene. And I feel like they did such a wonderful job of showing that tension, but also that kind of longing through this silent, dutiful work that Jennifer Lopez is doing in the scene. I don't think it was an accident that they chose to have the penis to be the thing that fell off of the statue. It was absolutely a metaphor. I mean, the fact that he was longing for her and they were kind of in a forbidden state. And then, of course, they castrate this statue. I found it to be quite intentional that the thing that they took off the statue wasn't a finger like in the Princess Diaries, or a nose is what they usually use for like sitcoms. Intentional and conscious storytelling where you're utilizing subtlety to make a huge impact. And the fact that not only did they accidentally castrate this statue, which I think was symbolism, but then she's helping him remove it from his hand. Another thing that I love about this movie is it feels good. It just feels, it looks, it sounds good. All things work together. They were intentional about everything. First of all, the color palette of the film, they never veer too far away from wedding colors. They're always using pastels, whites, creams. There are moments where they utilize black, which is useful with wedding palettes. A lot of times people use black for emphasis, whether it's black designs or black writing or something like that. Sometimes black is used as an accent color. And several times throughout the movie, Mary wore black as a statement underneath something that was pastel. I felt like there were so many different things that worked together, but throughout it all, the whole movie felt like a wedding. From the fonts used to the decor, her apartment, to her workplace, to just different scenes throughout the movie, it all looked like weddings. Like even her apartment, it looked soft and frilly and a little bit vintage, like a wedding. And we saw later when she chose her wedding dress and her hat and her headpiece, she liked vintage. That was Mary. And so to see her apartment look like a vintage wedding, I thought that was so cool. Also, her office place had a giant chandelier, something out of a wedding catalog, and their lobby was gorgeous. Everything about this movie looked like a wedding. And I thought that was so cool that they did that. Everyone was wearing pastels. Even Dr. Steve often wore pastels. I think the darkest color we saw him wear was a deep maroon, but everything else, everyone was wearing pastels, or if they didn't wear pastels or white, they were wearing black. So it definitely felt like a wedding. And we had several scenes that felt like they were right out of an old catalog. I just love how they used everything in the movie, from the music to the color palette to the hair, the makeup, the wardrobe. Everything worked to tell the story, and it all told the story within the context of a wedding. So there you have it. That's my recap of The Wedding Planner. This is still my favorite rom-com ever, and I love rom-coms. I wish we could get back to this more classic format where we're not getting too much drama, too much trauma, none of that kind of stuff. We're just getting a nice meet cute, a fun will they, won't they, a little push and pull, and then eventually they end up together, even if it's a little bit sordid. Somebody's got to crack a few eggs if you're going to make an omelet. So I love a good rom-com. I'm going to keep recapping them. So if you want me to recap a rom-com in particular, leave it in the comment section below and I will recap that next week. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. And I will see y'all next time. Bye.